Ever wonder what goes into supporting family structure? Today's guest supports the professionals that supports America's top family offices. Claire Kluever is the founder of Magnolia Solutions. Claire, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Tommy. Thanks for having me.
No problem. All right. So I kind of equate what you do is like to the auto industry where there's like these different tiers that support the car manufacturers. There's those top tier one manufacturers, which I look at as the professionals that are always working with the families directly. And there's tier two, which is the support that supports the support, right? And so help us understand like what you do and how you got into it.
Yeah, thank you. So I actually was working for Family Office Exchange, a consulting firm to the industry for about 15 years before I started my coaching practice. And I did a lot of recruitment and placed a lot of people in family offices. And just my work with those people and seeing how hiring was done, I realized that there could be a lot more done in the ways of looking for leadership skills within people that you're hiring as opposed to just sort of the technical expertise that is so important in these jobs. And the more I dug down into that, getting into this coaching practice, the more I realized that leadership development was really necessary within these offices to help them thrive and be better places to work.
What are like two things that you identified while at Fox that kind of speared you to go into Magnolia? Like what specific two items that you would say was consistent across the board when looking at leadership? Because it is a very unique skill set to come work in families. So what were those two?
I think the first thing was I really saw how loyal and hardworking employees of family offices were. Very genuine, wanting to do the right thing, problem solvers. And many times they just weren't getting the support they needed from the leadership to be able to do those things and not make it more difficult on them. So I really wanted to make cultures in family offices more healthy and better places to sort of support these loyal, hardworking people. And I also realized that there wasn't a lot of coaches that specialized in working specifically for family office professionals. And so it was a perfect way for me to add value to the industry and to support these people that I really respected.
And so would did you see this need at the top, the closest to the family, or at that next like middle management level where, to your point, the individuals felt lost because they weren't getting the support from upper management and the executives? Is that kind of where you felt the need was?
I saw the need from the top all the way through, entry level managers and family offices. And the great thing about leadership development is you can really make a big difference in a person's success as a leader by just helping them to have more self awareness and to think more with a meta view in terms of how decisions will impact the ecosystem as a whole, and simply using more of their people side of their brain and not so much of their technical side of their brain. So I think it really was just a place where there was a tremendous amount of opportunity to make improvement.
And what is your approach on how you look at these individuals? And to your point, taking off your technical hat and thinking more emotional, I would say, probably, and some logic. Like, what's that approach? What's your approach on handling that?
So there are sort of two ways that human beings develop. And this is something that I've done a lot of exploration around. And if you think of sort of the vertical side to the chart as your expertise and your tax knowledge, your investment knowledge, your estate planning expertise, etc., that's sort of your plane. And what I really wanted to focus on was vertical development, which is how do you show up? How do you motivate people? How do you get team think around solutions as opposed to just a top-down approach. And a lot of these things are just not natural to humans, and they're things that they need to sort of learn. And I love teaching. So there's a lot of teaching involved in the work that I do.
Yeah, I know in working with you personally, it's that self-awareness as well, like just understanding who you are in your own skin, right? And being able to advocate for you and also understand the energy of that moment and that day and how you approach a situation and not take things as personal sometimes. So when families do families usually come out and engage you personally to work with their team? Do they one of the things that you and I worked on were cohorts of like individuals to myself to help kind of talk about some of the challenges that we see at our level as well as one-on-one coaching. So help me understand and the audience understand kind of how you approach this process with a family.
Well, you mentioned that peer networks are something that are very highly appreciated in this industry. And the reason for that is it's a small industry and it's very specialized and has a lot of really unique aspects to it. So having peers that work in other family offices who understand what you're faced with and some of the unique challenges of the industry is really important to family office professionals. And so you've seen more and more of these circles or cohorts or councils coming into existence. And what I decided to do was to sort of make my circles, I call them leadership circles, three-pronged. And the first was that peer network where you can ask questions, be vulnerable, get support, get advice from other professionals who are in similar roles to yours, and also provide one-on-one coaching. And then the third leg to the stool is leadership development, training, and education. So I sort of created peer networks that are highly regarded. And then I added the element of coaching and teaching about leadership, which to me is what really is most important in the industry right now.
Yeah. Is that a trend that for the past like 5 years or so it's trending that way? Has it always been there and just not looked at or understood? Like help me understand the past 5 years of what this industry and specifically coaching individuals that support these families looks like, what it looked like 5 years ago versus today.
Well, the biggest change is just the number of family offices that are bringing in coaches for their professionals. When I started Magnolia 12 years ago, it was really quite rare that you would find a coach within a family office, and it was at the highest levels only. And so, what I've really enjoyed doing is bringing coaching down into the whole organization because I feel like the more layers of leadership you have in your office, the more your succession is going to go much smoother, the more you're going to have well functioning teams at all levels of the office. So I do quite a bit of work with rising leaders in the industry as well as existing executives.
And what kind of skill sets and characteristics and just attributes that people bring at that level that are rising, within the family office? Like, what are things that you're seeing? Because there's a lot of people that want to get into space, and people ask me, "How did you get in?" A lot of times, it's a serendipitous moment that you're introduced to a family and you kind of start working with them, and before you know it, you fast forward 10 years, you've been spending a lot of time with the family. But help people understand, like, what kind of characteristics are needed for an individual to really thrive in a family office space.
Right, right. That is a really important question. And I would say the horizontal capabilities, the technical expertise is what might get you in the door, but it's the vertical development that's going to keep you there. And some of the characteristics that I think really help somebody to thrive in a family office are to be very curious and open minded. And that can be counterintuitive to being a specialist or an expert because in tax or estate planning, there are black and white answers about strategies or ways of going about things. But then on the other side, you want to be very curious about what you don't know yet, or what others might bring to the table, or what others can bring that you are missing. So we never want to get into a place where we feel like we have all the answers. And unfortunately, family offices often push professionals to be the expert and have all the answers. And that's sort of an untenuous place to be. So I encourage my clients to be comfortable with ambiguity and innovation and thinking outside of the box and being very curious, which is counterintuitive to what they've been trained to do, but what actually results in the best solutions for the clients, the family members. And yeah,
That's very hard, right? That's a very hard place to be because a lot of us come from a perfect background that always has to have the answer and the
right.
solution for the family. And you bring up a good point here where you have to be almost humbled because you have to listen and bring ideas. And so what specifically do you do to help someone kind of get out of that uncomfortable state and be able to speak up and kind of think in that manner?
Right. So nobody wants to feel like they've been caught flat footed or without the answer or the wrong answer. And so I really encourage my clients to, again, use curiosity to express to others in the organization or the clients themselves. That's a really important question. That means a lot to, you and the rest of the office in terms of how that is handled. I want to do some more research on that. I want to check in with some more people on that so that I can bring you the best case solution, as opposed to trying to have the answer on the fly or in the moment. It really is a win-win for you to not always have the answer and to do the background and to do the exploration to make sure there isn't new innovation or new strategies or new resources that you hadn't used before, but that you now would want to employ.
Yeah, that's definitely something that's important to have that skill set because when people ask me about the space that we're in, the family office, you're not technically running a business per se with KPIs and certain metrics. You're really dealing with people in their family and their personal lives. And most of the questions are kind of not open-ended, but somewhat open-ended. Like, I'm thinking about this, and what are things I should be thinking about, right? And what I've seen with professionals in the space is almost a burnout because you're always trying to satisfy the family and doing research and bettering yourself. And so can we pivot for a second and think about individuals and how they balance their lives because we're always in this space of people's families, and sometimes the 9 to 5 mentality isn't necessarily in play because people will call you in the middle of the night, early in the morning, on weekends. If we could shift to like burnout, how do you work with individuals that are high achieving alpha individuals and say, there's some parameters that need to be put in place? How do you help them with that?
Right. That's such a good question because I would say most of my clients deal with too much to do and not enough time. So most family office professionals are in that mode. And the bottom line is we always want to look for the win-win. And the win-win in this scenario is I want to be able to do the best work for you possible. I want to be grounded. I want to be rested. I want to be feel balanced so that I can bring my best self to taking care of your family and what you need. And to be able to do that, it requires balance in my life, and I need to be able to get the right amount of sleep, and I need to be able to have family time on the weekends so that I can come back on Monday refreshed and ready to go. And it's funny, Tommy, because you are somebody that I quote from time to time, um, as a client who told me one time, I get some of my best work done at midnight to 2 a.m. And I just remember telling you that is not true. That is what you are telling yourself. But the reality is by midnight, you are not operating well. Your brain is completely drained and you are, you're going to be working 10 times as hard at midnight as you would at 8 in the morning to be able to come up with a solution. So I actually refer back to that story periodically. And that was you, Tommy.
Yeah, so true. So true. Yeah, I think it's that perception of thinking that it's quiet, no one's around. You thinking the caffeine and the coffee sitting on your desk is going to help you get through the issue. But yeah, you brought perspective to
Right.
that situation for me. I do appreciate that. So help me then, because in that moment for me, there's a deadline, there's things that needs to be done. And so you, I think, are in a position where you've actually worked with the C-suite and looking down and saying, how do we help empower our staff? And you're also there through these peer networks from that staff level, looking up and saying, this is the support I need from the executive team.
Yes.
So help me understand and help everyone else on this podcast understand what are the C-suite executives looking for from their team to support them in their work with the family?
So,
And I'll go, and after you answer this, we'll go into the other perspective of a little more detail of what specifically the C-suite should be thinking about because the staff needs assistance and they want to obviously know what they need, and hopefully both sides on this podcast kind of hear the needs kind of played
right,
out here.
right. Well, I encourage my clients regularly who are feeling overwhelmed and they have too much on their plate and they are worried about meeting deadlines or delivering the best possible outcome to their clients because they have too many things they're trying to juggle at the same time. And one of the most important things to do in that scenario is to bring to your senior leaders or bring to the family members a clear picture of what the landscape looks like in terms of what is on your plate and ask them to help you to prioritize so that they are not only helping you to understand what's most important to them and what the highest priorities are, but they're also giving you permission to maybe drop some other things down into the lower levels of your to-do list, and that way you're meeting everybody's expectations and you're setting yourself up for more success as opposed to just trying to get it all done at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's very accurate when I look at some of the clients I work with today and as well as when I worked with the families directly. I look at it as more of a continuum. That conversation is an overarching continuum of what is a theme, what are the goals that we need to be looking at long term. And within each of the months or the weeks, there's these transactional type of deliverables that happen along this continuum. And so we always look at, to your point, this win-win from the family's perspective. They're like, well, we have this staff and we have you here. You should just get it done. Right. And this immediate need. And a lot of times just maybe a reaction of not understanding the process, not understanding the needs today versus tomorrow. And definitely something that it takes time to work with the family, right? And it's not that an individual dictates to the family, this is how it's going to be done. And it's also not dictated by the family. It's just this, I would say, coming together and trying to figure out what makes sense because every family is different, right? When we were in these peer network groups, what worked for one family doesn't necessarily work for the other, right? And so we're trying to find commonalities of how to navigate.
Right.
So what was without sharing names, a challenging situation for an individual that you've coached over the 12 years with Magnolia, of kind of where they've started, where they kind of wanted to be, and kind of how you helped them kind of get from point A to point B?
Right. So I was thinking about that. And one particular situation that I remember was a young woman who wanted to be promoted in her family office. And the way she was leading was through stress and anxiety and negativity. So she was worried about a lot of things. She didn't trust the people that were on her team to worry about it as much as she did. So she was constantly checking with them or micromanaging their work or trying to dictate the way things were going to go because she was really clamping down and trying to control more than was humanly possible. And when I helped her to sort of think more along the lines of collaboration and bringing other people into the solutions and understanding that they may not always do it the exact same way as you do it. And that may be okay, right? So being more open minded and looking for the win win, which also requires you to let your team spread their wings, try different things, be innovative. Maybe they make a mistake. Maybe it doesn't turn out exactly as you would hoped. But in the process, they have become more self confident and they've learned something and they've been able to have some agency over how they're doing their work. And it empowers them and it motivates people. Because I'll tell you one thing that is critical for satisfaction on the job is the feeling that you are learning and that you're developing and that you are not just sitting still in one place and just being sort of a cog in a wheel. So, micromanaging is common in family offices and it is not successful because then you end up being clogged up and you end up being a obstacle to getting things done, and you've got people that are just waiting for you to tell them what to do or go left or go right, and they're not developing. And so you just have sort of a recipe for dissatisfaction. And so once she was able to sort of let go and let some other people take on a little bit more responsibility and decision making and self starting, and um, the whole team started operating more effectively. And by the way, then she had more teamwork and collaboration, and she wasn't a bottleneck anymore because she was spreading the wealth of decision making and thinking outside of the box and getting the work done.
Yeah, so that's I agree, very common in our space. Do you know kind of what prompts people to kind of have that mentality, and what are like the two things that people just from listening to this podcast should be thinking about if like, yeah, that's the case I'm in. I need to let go. What are two things that maybe they can also work on their own that will help them kind of give up some of that control?
Well, that's why you find so much of this in family offices is this intense fear of not getting it done right or on time or with the best possible result. And so I think fear is actually a big factor here. And if you let go of the fear of being perfect and accept that 95% is probably going to be satisfactory, that also requires being vulnerable and being real with the clients and setting expectations. If you set an expectation with a family client that there will never be a mistake, then you are really setting yourself up for a culture of fear and insecurity. And nobody works at their best when they're scared or feeling insecure with what could happen next. So, this whole culture of perfection and having the right answer, we need to just loosen our grip a little bit so that we can see all of the options besides A and Z, millions of options that are available to us in between those two choices.
Yeah, I think looking at your boxes of the vertical and the horizontal, right? The technical, yes, there's a higher level of being accurate, right? Making sure tax returns, estate plans are from a technical standpoint need to be accurate. The vertical part, the curiosity that you talk about is where we need to be more creative and not always have the answers, but kind of flush out through, I think, just being inquisitive with family members, asking when people say, "Hey, I need this X, Y, and Z done for me." A lot of times we just jump into the just do mode and just do what they
Fix.
want versus sometimes stepping back and saying, okay, let's understand why. What is the reasoning? What's the root cause of it? And a lot of times it's a totally different answer, a totally different path
Yes.
that we create in our heads as advisors when we first hear someone requesting something.
Yes, that's such a good example. Family office professionals are fixers, they are problem solvers, and they pride themselves on that. And they believe that that's sort of the key value that they bring to the table. And I would say stepping up a layer vertically from that would be looking for the win-win, which is asking more questions, being more inquisitive, being more collaborative with your clients on what their options are and not looking for perfection, but rather looking for the best balance of focus and assistance and prioritization. Their clients are people too, and they realize that we are humans also. And when we can show our human self to them, they are able to show their human self to us as well. And being vulnerable and actually, not always having the answer and not always getting it perfect actually is a connecting mechanism as opposed to one that people should be afraid of.
I agree. You bring up human piece of this business. And again, these are relationships, intimate relationships that you have with families because you're getting into a lot more personal detail if it's health, if it's stresses, if it's family dynamics.
Right.
So, how do individuals balance their personal family life with the family life that's on the business side? Help me understand how you go about supporting individuals to have that balance to also focus and remember that they have their own family at home that should have some of their attention as well.
Yes. Um, I talk a lot about boundaries, Tommy, and many family office professionals are afraid to set boundaries. And the reality is, when you do set boundaries and you have priorities that you also make clear to your clients, they respect that. And when you are willing to say to them, I got your call, I will be looking into this on Monday morning and I will get something back to you by Tuesday afternoon. That's many times all they need to hear, as opposed to on Saturday night when you're at dinner with your family, you leaving and going to your office and trying to hammer out an answer. So many times it's just setting expectations and then delivering on what you've promised. That's what they're really looking for. And I think we misinterpret a Saturday night call as a fire drill. And so I think it would be better if we just put things into context and set our own boundaries, lived within the boundaries that we set expectations, communicate clearly and often, and just set up a relationship that's built on respect, mutual respect.
And so let's go down one level deeper. So let's say you're a middle manager working for a high achieving executive that can't say no. And you're getting that call from the C suite saying, we need this answer tonight. It's Saturday. And they are in between the family. And sometimes the family doesn't know that that's happening. How does the individual work with their management to say, there's got to be a way that's a win-win that again you've promised something that is out of my control. How's that conversation happen? Because that happens a lot, right? We're these perfectionists. We want to get things done right and as soon as possible. But also there's these dynamics within the family office that have nothing to do with the family, but the actual team itself.
Yeah. And I think the answer to that is not solved in that moment. You've already created that scenario, so you have to follow through and deliver on what's been promised to the clients. But that requires a conversation later and maybe more conversations around a table. What sort of culture do we want to create in this office? What sort of expectations do we want to set for our clients? And if you can get the organization collectively to agree on those boundaries and those expectations, then it works a lot more smoothly because there's consistency at all levels. So working for a boss who won't set boundaries or who, does not believe in balance is going to be really difficult. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing a lot of work in the industry with the leaders of this industry and saying there's a better way to do this. There's a healthier way to do this. And it's not always to just say yes, how high do you want me to jump? But rather to work together collaboratively in an environment where there's mutual trust and respect.
Do you see based on culture, right? I think that's a big thing that's happening right now in the space is trying to bring a culture that supports the family in many different avenues and ways, and bringing people onto the team to support that mission is key, right? And so is there a difference between a G1 type of office culture and then a G2, that transitioning, and then also six generations down, right? That culture. Like, is there differences in those types of cultures that people should be aware of when they are looking at getting into the space?
Yes, I think there are. And I would also tell you it really depends on the family and the family members themselves because they will bring to the family office the culture that they created in their operating company, if it's first generation. If it's second or cousins generation, they're going to have a lot more decision makers. It's going to be a lot more complicated. So there's a lot more relationship management in those types of office. And then when you get into third gen, fourth gen, there's a lot more education and a lot more servicing of younger family members, which requires a different type of service platform than what you would have with a G1 family office. So I think the work changes, the focus changes, and many times the culture changes because of where the family is in their development and evolution. And just a whole host of different issues come up as you get into the cousins generation and beyond. But one thing I'll say when I first started working in this industry is many family offices really just focused on the elder generation and keeping them happy. And what I've seen over the last 20 years that I really love is that now we're doing much more attention and much more servicing and meeting clients where they are at the second gen, the third gen, the fourth gen, and respecting them for where they are in their life cycle and meeting their needs however that looks, which, as you know, is very different for a 20-year-old versus an 80-year-old. And a 20-year-old that was maybe born into this situation as opposed to created the wealth themselves. So I do see offices really shifting to adjust to the clientele, and I think that is very healthy. And this is going to be good for the family office's longevity that they are meeting the family dynamics proactively and servicing the different family members according to where they are in their life and what they need and what's important to them.
Right. And that touch point is that client service touch point with the front. That's the front line with the family, right? There's this. I look at the world of the family office in two different spheres. There's the operational piece, the back office piece, but then there's also that client service, which is the front facing and working with families. To your point, where you might be dealing with G1 or G2, but then if you have a family tree that you're working with, you're now getting exposed to those G3, those cousins level. And so in your one-on-one coaching with individuals that are having to navigate mom and dad and how they want to, I would say, expose their children to this world, like what are some challenges on the client service side of working with families? Because it now, again, this goes even more intimate. Now you're helping someone mold their children's understanding of let's say economics and finances and trust. And so how do you help people with their one-on-one coaching in that manner?
Right. So there are a lot of complexities in dealing with next gen family members because different parents have had different experiences and they want different things for their kids. So you might have a family office where three siblings with their children want differing degrees of information to be shared, or some that don't want any information shared. And then the brother over here is an open book with their children. So you can imagine how complicated that would be to try to deal with the cousins who have this really widely varying level of information and education. But the bottom line is parents, we need to understand from them what the best case scenario will be and what they're most worried about so that we can then counsel them appropriately on what we've seen working well through our experiences with rising gen family members. So sometimes they're just afraid and so they clam up or they don't want to share anything, where in actuality, it might be better for them to actually give their kids different levels of information at different ages to expose them, to get them more aware of what's coming down the road, as opposed to, at your father's death, you find out that you've inherited this huge inheritance and you're caught flat footed with not prepared. So I think there's a spectrum, and it's also something that we need to work within, and we need to sort of like understand our clients and what they're most worried about and what they most hope will happen, and then give them our best advice and counsel
Yeah. So
to
true. So true.
create a
Bring again,
unity.
bringing the human piece to that
Yeah,
equation
yeah,
is very challenging. And it's sometimes when you have the younger generation, the cousins wanting more information, but the parents are, to your point, are hesitating.
right.
You could put a family office professional in a interesting situation because you want to build that trust, right? And so how do you help individuals keep that trust with the cousins level while they work through those with the parents, right? How do you keep it? Because again, we are there to help the family, and especially in that transition from G2 to G3, or even any transition, there's always this more senior family members are wanting to kind of dictate how we approach certain communications to the younger generations, but the younger generations are going to be there much more longer than the older generation. They want that trust with their advisors. So how do you help people navigate that?
Well, the same thing we were just talking about, which is, what is your vision for what happens with this family, your kids, as well as the cousins group as a whole, when you're no longer able to be in control or to, command what is happening? How do you want them to work together? What do you want them to do with this wealth? Or how do you want them to approach this wealth? A lot of times people do things out of fear of the unknown or fear of what they think might happen. So a lot of this really is helping them to see other options and play through the scenarios and encourage them to maybe have some conversations with their children directly. Because when they put you in the middle and you're talking to mom and dad and then you're trying to deliver that's called triangulation. And it's really not the healthiest way to go about it. And so, working to find opportunities to bring the family together to talk through things themselves is some of the most powerful work that I see my clients do. And oftentimes, it allays a lot of the fears of the elder generation and the younger generation, because they're finally opening up to each other about what they want to happen or what they fear could happen, so that they can have a deep and human conversation about the situation. So
Would
as you can
you?
tell, I'm all about communication and direct communication
Yes.
and sort of honesty and vulnerability, and that is what really allows us to connect as human beings. And without those factors, there can be a lot of misunderstandings or misconceptions or interpretations. And so the more we can encourage the family members to have these important conversations together, the better.
Yeah. And I believe, just through experience, having those conversations with the older generation and being candid and telling people how you really feel versus being guarded because you want to give them the answer.
Right.
If you build that relationship with them, you can almost sometimes call them out and say, that I understand your feelings, I understand kind of the fears, but also research shows that if we don't start this process, there also going to be resentment when the box is open, per se. So
Right.
it's easy to say, it's hard to do. But if we think about back to that human element and really helping people this journey, because there's no playbook. We're not really following a playbook. This is someone's personal life, and so on this
Right.
continuum, you're helping them again on this little transaction, on this overall continuum of their life, and it's very important. And would you like really push staff to talk to upper management about the situations and the struggles. Not that they're looking for them to step in, but really help with guidance. Is that something that we should be really doing within the office, right on the operational side, is really working with our C-suite team?
It's interesting that question because what I have seen happen, not irregularly, is that the senior level of the family office gets somewhat removed from the day to day and from the communication with the clients, and they start to just sort of view themselves as problem solvers in a sort of up in a tower, and they lose that human element of, the bottom line is this is the client's money. And no matter what happens in any of these conversations, they do get to decide what they want. And so our job is to be more shepherds and guides and facilitators to helping them make good decisions. And at the end of the day, what they decide is what we act on. And that's something that I've been very clear on from my earliest days at Family Office Exchange, is that we can't lose sight of the fact that this is not our money. So these clients, this is their money, and they ultimately get to make the decisions whether we agree with them or not. And I think sometimes when you get at the very highest level, you get out of touch with that, and management wants you to just say no to them or tell them that's a bad idea or tell them they can't do that. And none of those answers are sufficient. And it's much more complicated than that. And so we have to get down into the trenches in conversation with our clients in understanding who they are, what's important to them, what their vision is of success in the future for their life, for the next generation, etc. And that's how we develop the tightest bonds. And that's how we're able to do the best work for our clients, because we're partnering and we're treating them like, the human beings that they deserve to be treated like. They do have circumstances that helps them to, have a lot of money, but that doesn't mean that their voices are not important or not accurate in terms of their own life story.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that I would say the tension that is brought to the table is you're trying to apply these business principles to someone's personal life. And a lot of times,
Right.
most of the conversations and most of the decisions are more emotionally driven than actual numbers and facts, right? It's that qualitative feel of, what makes me feel good today to do this exercise. Just like you at your family table, when you guys make decisions on things, you don't
Yeah.
sit there and say, well, what's the profit and loss on that proposition? It's more of a feeling and gut of
Yeah.
approach. And so that was something that I had to learn early on, was to kind of have one G1 kind of yell at me saying, take off your damn tax cap and just think, right? And
Right.
think about what we're trying to do here and stop taking everything from a technical lens. And I think that moment kind of was an eye opener for me, because they don't really care about the technical piece of it. Most of it's emotionally driven. So,
Right. Right.
which is very challenging to navigate.
Yeah.
I would say to kind of round, I have more questions for you. I want to kind of dive into some of the personal things you're working on, pet projects that I would love to hear about. One last question on professionals. Can you give us a story of someone that, besides me, you can't use me on this, of someone I know, right? That's gone off the table,
Tommy's.
of someone that you're like, wow, they are in in a dark place,
Yeah.
and then you saw this transformation of this person that's like, wow, that's who I knew you were. Like, give us an example of
Yeah.
what that story, that one story you can hang your hat on and say, that's
Yeah.
why I do this.
Yeah. So when you talk about vertical human development, at the top of the chart, sort of when you reach your pinnacle of success in your life, is when you fully believe in your own power and you let go of a lot of fear. And what happens for people when they let go of fear and they believe in their own power is they can really show up strong and innovatively and with an open mind and wisdom beyond their years of when they were afraid and trying to have the right answer and trying to be perfect. And it's almost like, think of it as, the water wheel without water just doesn't grind very well. But as soon as you add the fluid and the water and the mechanism to make it smooth, that's what sort of happens when you let go of being afraid or feeling not good enough. And that is a huge transformation for anybody in their life, and that can happen at any point in your life. It's just a personal belief, that you know what your values are, what your beliefs are, what's important to you, and stand by those things and go forward with more bravery and confidence, and an open mind is really, really important at that top level.
You brought fear up a couple. I'm going to take one more question here. You brought up fear a few times during this conversation. Where does that fear come from? Is it embarrassment? Is it failure? Where, because in my career earlier on, the struggle that I had was fear of being wrong, the embarrassment of something. And then at one point in my career, I'm like, you know what? I don't care anymore. I need to put myself out there to fail, because if you don't fail and you don't spread your wings and you don't learn, you're just going to keep staying in that resentment phase. Like, what is driving that fear?
Comfort level and patterns of operating and the way you talk to yourself, in your own head. It is really nothing externally that creates that other than your own self and your own self talk. And that's one of the reasons why I love this coaching work, because you can actually sort of open up somebody's eyes to the option of, you don't have to live in your head. You don't have to believe the stories that your brain is telling you, because your brain is there to protect you and keep you safe. And to step out of your comfort zone and learn and innovate and get creative, you have to let go of those messages in your brain that are saying, don't do it, it's not safe, you might make a mistake, you might, embarrass yourself, you might not, look perfect on the outside. And letting go of that is incredibly liberating.
I think I read somewhere 85% of the stuff that we worry about never comes to fruition, which
Right.
is
Right.
mind-boggling, right?
And I
Let's
think
let's just go ahead.
I think you bring up one important point, and this is going deep, so there's more to talk about this. But the more you can be present and not focusing on what happened in the past and obsessing over that, and not focusing on what might happen in the future, but here and now and today and in this moment, the better you will be at being grounded and focused and creative and innovative and looking at things from a meta view, as opposed to down in the trenches of either worrying about what happened or worrying about what's going to happen, but actually just approaching this moment for what it is and being present here and now.
So true. That's so true. And everything we do in life, right? With raising kids and work and all the things that we juggle, that is so true. So let's pivot. Personal stuff. What are things that keep you moving besides the work that you do with helping people like myself get us out of these dark places? What kind of things are driving you these days, Claire?
So, what I'm really enjoying, Tommy, is continuing education and continuing to further hone my craft as being a really solid, successful leadership coach to my clients. And so, some of the things I'm studying right now are somatics and embodied transformation. And as I mentioned to you, vertical development and how humans develop over time and sort of what our options are. And by the way, some people stay at a very low level of development as adults and they never break out into some of these higher, more freeing, just joy and passion and purpose filled existence. And so the more I can learn about helping people to do that and what's entailed in doing that, the I just get super pumped about that. So I'm constantly trying to understand the human condition more and what all goes into that and how we allow ourselves to reach, our full potential. So I get really jazzed about that.
That's interesting because it seems like it's exposing people to all the things that are out there that could possibly help them live a better life. And there's no one answer, right? Like anything in life, is you have to find something that kind of speaks to you. So I had a
Right.
previous guest talk about some of the mentoring that he's been supporting and helping individuals at a young age understand that there's different paths in life that you need to identify that's true to you and not because your
Yeah.
parents navigate you one way or the other. It's sad that we get into this hamster wheel sometimes of, you know,
Yeah.
high school, college, career, and before you know it, it's like, well, what happened between, high school and today? And before you know it, it's 30 years later, and you kind of question yourself and kind of living in that moment, like being in the present today is something that I think is very important that you hit on.
One thing that I ask my clients a lot, Tommy, to sort of get to that is don't focus on what you should do, what you need to do, what you have to do. Tell me what you want to do. And so often we are disconnected from what we really want to do and what we're meant to do and what we're being called to do. And I try to help my clients to wake up to that. And sometimes they, take different paths and they go different directions. And that needs to be okay because that's the best way to live your best life is to really sort of know what's important to you and what you want to do and what you feel driven to do and what you would feel the most successful if happened for you. And that oftentimes doesn't even have anything to do with our job.
That's definitely something working with you kind of got the brain to start thinking about like, what do I want? Because we're
Yeah.
always, to your point, in this type of fix it coming up with solutions. They're always looking to service other people before we service ourselves. And it's a very difficult and challenging exercise to
Yeah.
kind of go through because I think the first five things you write down that of wants have nothing to do with the true want that you want in life.
Right.
And
Right.
yeah, I agree. I think that's fascinating work. What else? What else are you? What other things are you do on the weekends when you put those boundaries up with your clients and say, "I'm not working this weekend. I'm with my family." What things are you working on and having fun doing?
I'm super good at being a slug, Tommy, and that's my vulnerable moment for the point, for the moment. But, I love just getting out in nature, taking my dog for a walk, or being with my family. I have my first grandchild born. So,
Congrats.
family and nature and connection with others. I work at my church every Sunday. So, just doing things that fuel my passion and things that really allow me to feel purpose is what I do, not only with my free time, but with my work. And that's probably why I'm so energized and motivated and just loving what I'm doing, because it really brings me a lot of personal purpose.
Awesome. Well, Claire, thank you very much for hanging out with me for the past hour or so, talking about the things that you do to support
Thank
the
you for
individuals that
having
support
me.
families. Yeah, it's a fascinating world that, again, people ask me, how do you get into it? It's like you just somehow fall into it, and there's all these support systems out there that help individuals be able to help families across the United States here. And so, and in the description of this video, we'll have Claire's information, her website. If you're curious about more and learning more about what Claire does, definitely advise you to reach out because I've personally benefited from this. I know many people within my peer networks continue to benefit, and it really creates that network. Claire, I agree. It's sometimes you're in a lonely place
Yeah.
as an individual working with a family, especially if it's a small family and it's one person, or sometimes if it's 20 people. Sometimes we do feel lonely, and having that peer to reach out to and just be vulnerable is so helpful. So I appreciate everything you've done for me professionally and personally. So Claire, thank you for joining
Right.
us.
The thanks is twofold. I appreciate you reaching out to me and inviting me to be on your podcast, and it was really, really fun. I really appreciate the offer and that you're interested. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire. Have a great day.
All right, take care.
Bye bye.
Bye.
All right, let me stop. All